Today is Australia Day. Australia Day is on the 26th of January every year, and until quite recently, I did partake in celebrating Australia Day. But I could not. I've had a change of opinion, and I had to look deep within myself and say, what are we really celebrating in this country? I've seen a lot of racism around. I've also in my past had racism used against me. Um, and I've seen racism used on other people on public transport, uh, in social occasions. So I want to share something. It's called Understanding Racism in Australian Society, and it was a paper published by the New South Wales Department of Education and Training back in 2009. A lot of things have changed since 2009, but there's a lot of things in this article that I'm going to read that really still make sense. Back in 2010 to 2013, New South Wales Department of Education and Training had a Racism No Way campaign. It is an Australian anti-racism education initiative managed by the Department of Education and Training on behalf of education systems nationally. So, racism in Australia. In Australia, racism is inextricably linked to the history of colonisation and migration. The original inhabitants, Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people, were dispossessed of the land and were discriminated against by the first British and European settlers. For some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, the process of colonisation has been perceived as invasion. Racial discrimination has continued to influence the lives of Indigenous Australians in the 2 centuries following British settlement. The migration of people from all parts of the world led to the increased cultural and linguistic diversity of the Australian population. Prejudice and discrimination have also been directed towards many groups who arrived in Australia, in particular towards groups from language backgrounds other than English, despite the fact that many government migration schemes invited people to settle in Australia. Until recent years, racist policies and practices were also embedded within Australian laws and institutions, such as the White Australia policy. The most telling examples of these was the Forgotten Generation, or the Stolen Generation, the removal of Aboriginal children from their families, and the denial of full citizenship rights to Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people. This, of course, changed in 1969. Similarly, the White Australian policy aimed to restrict immigration by people from non-European backgrounds. Historically, rises in unemployment have often led to calls for migration restrictions, and in some cases led to the scapegoating of people who were seen to be different to members of the dominant culture. While legislation now exists to protect the rights of all citizens, there is a continuing legacy today from the effects of these racist practices. As Australian society has become more diverse with continuing migration, expressions of racism in Australian popular culture have changed over time. Racist language and attitudes that were common at the end of the 19th century are no longer acceptable 100 years later. However, racism continues to find expression in new ways, reinforced through the popular media and mass media itself. Contemporary expressions of racism have emerged in recent years related to notions of nationhood, i.e. rabid nationalism, which are seen as incompatible with diversity. These racist beliefs may be expressed in various stereotypical views of who the real Australians are. This form of racism is based on the ideology of national culture in which minority cultures are regarded as alien and a threat to social cohesion. It consists of pervasive cultural assumption where the customs and beliefs of the dominant group in society are presented as the norm. As a result, the status and behaviour of minority groups, particularly those who are more visibly different, are defined and judged with respect to the dominant group of largely British and Celtic backgrounds. These attitudes are widely discussed in the media, where they are presented as reasonable and common sense and reflected through media images that do not accurately portray Australia's cultural diversity. In this way, racist ideologies are expressed and reinforced through a process of group interaction and thereby absorbed into popular culture. Racist beliefs are also at the core of the resentment expressed by some people at measures taken by governments to address the disadvantages of particular groups of people. Affirmative measures and positive discrimination are frequently seen as the preferential treatment of one group at the expense of another group, and the means of redressing the disadvantage inherent in society. Examples of this include opposition to Aboriginal land rights, calls to the removal of special benefits for particular groups, and resentment towards provision of English language support to migrants. These beliefs are compounded by the notion that treating all people in the same way equates to equity and social justice, when in fact not everyone begins life with the same opportunities. This resentment often finds expression in the belief that reverse racism is occurring. The notion of reverse racism is that people from the dominant culture are also being discriminated against or not receiving the same benefits as people from minority groups. It needs to be understood that there is no such a thing as reverse racism. If you are the dominant culture, you enact the laws. At any individual level, all ethnic or cultural groups are capable of both discriminating against each other groups and of being discriminated against, although minority groups are more likely to suffer from institutional racism. Racism affects everyone. It damages communities by limiting the contributions of its members and disrupts peaceful coexistence and cooperation between groups. It damages individuals by destroying self-confidence and preventing them from achieving their potential. It is particularly damaging for children as it hampers social development, which is so needed, and limits educational opportunities. The consequences of racism, social injustice, are less productive economy and a divided community are clearly detrimental, not only for its victims but to society as a whole. Racism is a destructive and persistent evil that brings only harm. Sadly, it is often a misinformed response to economic hardship. Rather than solving economic problems, however, racism fuels the fire of suffering by intimidating its victims and corrupting its perpetrators. Racial prejudice is a corrosive influence attacking the most fundamental values of Australian society: our commitment to justice, egalitarianism, and a fair go for all. That is what there's another aspect I want to raise outside this article. Having read the history of genocide against the Aboriginal people, the first peoples of Australia, I cannot in good conscience celebrate on a day that the first racist policies were starting to be enacted against Aboriginals. I want to draw in something. Here are all the genocides during post First Fleet. The Bathurst Massacre of 1824, Cape Grim Massacre 1828, Fremantle Massacre 1830, Comincing Ground Massacre 1833 to 1834, Battle of Pinjarra 1834, Mile Creek Massacre 1836, Waterloo Creek Massacre 1838, Benalla Massacre 1838, Murdering Gully Massacre 1838, Wiradjuri Wars 1830s to the 1840s, Lagrange Massacre 1865, Dampier Archipelago Massacre 1868, and there were many, many more. So I'm sorry, but look, yeah, it wasn't my ancestors. I don't have any Anglo or Celtic blood in me, but you know, I can't, in good conscience, celebrate Australia Day on the 26th of January. On another day, with the inclusion of the First Peoples, yeah, but not on a day that has the beginnings of genocide to it. Be back with another video soon. Bye.